Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our series of Civics, Politics with Paul, going over the government in the United States lesson, first section on the legislative branch. Again, my name is Paul. I am one of the instructors, the main social studies instructor here at Penn Foster High School. Some quick little contact information. Please be aware that our main phone number line, 1-888-427-1000. You can be able to speak with myself, any of the members of our educational team, as well as our services department, with any questions you have as you go through the program. You can also use the help and support page to be able to send in emails and look up any general or frequently asked questions. We do also have a lot of live help and webinars available. Same way as you register for this webinar, you see a lot of messages coming out from the high school education department about both video webinars as well as live help sessions. Please use those. Please take advantage of the support that we do provide as often as you can. Even if you're not able to attend webinars, if you register for them, just like this one, you'll receive a recording of it by email the following day, so you'll always have access to those webinars, all those recordings. And then, of course, you can certainly contact us with other questions as you go through your program. A new feature that we're using now, if you text the word "learn" to 39033, you'll be connected to the high school education department. And that can be a really quick and easy way of answering really quick and easy questions. And that, again, is very much open. It's during our usual office hours of 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So feel free to use those, take advantage of that resource as well. And we also have an appointment scheduler. In the webinar recording that you'll receive tomorrow, you'll see a webinar, or you'll see an appointment scheduler link that if you want any additional help with your U.S. Civics course or any of the other social studies courses, you can use that appointment scheduler to get additional help. We do have other appointments for other courses, so as you view webinars, you can certainly ask about those resources as well to be able to, again, get in contact with member of the education staff, really easy, and be able to get the help that you need. So by all means, ask questions in these ways. You can also ask questions as we go through the webinar, and I'll be more than happy to answer those as well. So the webinar today, we're going to be covering, like I said, the legislative section, the legislative branch section, and we'll be looking at the work of both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, how a bill becomes a law, as well as the process of impeachment. That's highlighted within our reading assignments, and that's something that a lot of people are interested in these unsettled times, it seems. So we'll kind of talk about that, and like I said, you can certainly ask questions as we go through the material. As you have them, and towards the end, I'll be more than happy to answer any other questions that you guys have. So let's kind of jump in on the lower house of our U.S. Congress, which is the House of Representatives. They have 435 members. All members are elected every 2 years. So last year, in 2016, we had not only a presidential election, but we also had all 435 members elected last year. Next year, in 2018, in November of 2018, we'll have another election with all the members of the House, as well as other state and local officials. So kind of those of you who have very competitive House races will, I'm sure, see those races come up in the next few months, unfortunately. In terms of the leadership within the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is the the top person in the House of Representatives. In terms of presidential succession, the Speaker is actually third in line. So if the President is at some point not able to serve in office, the Vice President would become President. If he's not, our current Vice President is Mike Pence. If he's not, it goes down to then the Speaker of the House, which is Paul Ryan of the state of Wisconsin. So he is the third in line. He also sets the agenda and the schedule for what goes on in the House. Basically, any bill that he wants to have put on the agenda is going to go there. There's often a lot of bills that come up to the Speaker saying, "Hey, can you put this on the agenda?" That because of the Speaker's perhaps support of it, or lack of support, or the majority party's lack of support in it, sometimes that bill does not go onto the agenda. The Speaker is voted in by the majority party. So if Paul Ryan is a Republican and the Republicans have the majority, that's how he's able to be Speaker of the House. If the Democrats were in the majority, they would have their pick, a Democrat as the Speaker of the House. The Republicans in the majority also have the second and third positions in leadership are the majority leader and the majority whip. The leader really is there to help the Speaker set the agenda and the schedule, is also there to help organize the political party, the Republican Party, and the whip is in charge of making sure that members of that party, so the majority whip is making sure that all the Republicans are voting the way that Republicans are supposed to be voting, that they're all voting together. The same two positions are in the minority level as well. So the Democrats have their own minority leader who wants their agenda and schedules their group, and as well as a whip who organizes the party, makes sure that all members of the Democratic Party are voting as a block, or at least enough of them are voting in the block to be able to make changes to policy, try to influence policy. In terms of the function of the House, it's very structured, and it's run by the majority. The majority has a lot of power within the House of Representatives. So the Republicans, having the majority, are able to set their own agenda. If you think back, recently we had the debate on healthcare, on repealing the Affordable Care Act and trying to create a replacement. The Speaker, Paul Ryan, the majority leader as well, and the whip, were really concentrating on the Republicans. They were able to say, okay, as long as all or the vast majority of Republicans are voting for this bill, and we'll talk more about the bill in a second, but as long as we are all voting for this repeal, it's going to pass. And the Democrats and the minority were not really able to do much about that, because in the minority party in the House, they don't have a lot of power. They don't have a lot of ability to stop bills from being passed by the U.S. by the House of Representatives. In terms of how members are elected, House districts will change based on population. So because we have 435 members, those members have to be divided among the over 300 million people who live in the United States. So and it has to be at least fairly evenly voted or evenly distributed. States like or low populated states such as Montana, Utah, North and South Dakota, they will sometimes, their House of Representatives members will have sometimes less people within their district, but a whole state has to have at least one member of the House of Representatives. They're not able to go across state borders. So a state like Montana, which has a relatively low population, that representative is going to represent that entire state within the U.S. Congress. And the way that the House decides how many districts or how many congressmen are from that district or from that state is based on its population. And the population has to be counted. So we have what's called the census. The U.S. Constitution established a census in order to count everyone in the country every 10 years. So this happened back in 2010. This will happen again in 2020. That every household will get a form that asks to list and identify the people who live in the home. And then that census paper is sent back to the federal government to calculate and be able to what's called apportion. Basically, the apportionment is counting the people and then dividing up the districts, dividing up the congressional districts based on that population. And that redistricting, that changing of the borders, is sometimes called gerrymandering, meaning that the members of the Congress are essentially choosing their borders. The political parties are choosing the borders that will help support their candidates. So if as in a Republican district, when the redistricting happens, a Republican congressman will want a majority Republican district. A Democrat will want a majority Democratic district for them to be elected from. It's really a system that very much benefits the person already in power, the party in power. But it's led to a lot of problems in that, because gerrymandering has become so scientific, has become so easy for our political parties, our Republicans and Democrats, to pick their voters, pick the people who they want in their district. We have very few competitive House races. And so the only concern that Democrats or Republicans have to have when they're as a member of Congress, they have to be concerned with people in their own party. So a Republican will vote as conservative as they have to be in order to make sure that they get reelected by their political party. Democrats have to vote as liberally or as democratically as they have to in order to keep their seat. So this is a very complicated issue that the study unit and reading assignments really go through pretty thoroughly. Are there any questions about that, about gerrymandering or the representation within Congress? Okay, no questions right now, but if you do have questions, feel free to write them in. The other sort of main function of the House of Representatives, all tax and spending bills that are brought up to Congress have to start within the U.S. House of Representatives. It is part of our check and balance system, in which the Congress has the power to set taxes and set a budget for the federal government. And the reason that it specifically starts in the House of Representatives is our founders believed that the House was going to be the group of representatives at the federal level who are going to be closest to the people. That because their districts were relatively small, thinking about a congressman from the state of New York or the state of Virginia, one of the more populated states, their district is going to be pretty small size-wise. So they're going to be able to go talk to the people who they represent a lot easier than the president will be, or even a U.S. senator will be, because the senator has to represent an entire state. But because a congressperson is able to go back to their district and be able to go back to the people that they represent a lot easier, that they are the closest people. They're the closest representatives to the people, so they're going to know what people are going to find important for tax policy or for spending policies. And this brings us to our first poll question. What is the process of counting all Americans called? Is it apportion? Is it the census, a quorum, or a pro tem? What is the process of counting all Americans? Give you guys about another 5 seconds. Okay, thank you. So a lot of different opinions. So let's talk about this. The process of counting all Americans is called the census. So that's again when people are signing up and saying this is how many people live in my home every 10 years. The apportionment is it happens after the census. So once the people are counted, this apportion process means that our federal officials or our state officials are looking at the population saying, okay, where are we going to draw or redraw our congressional districts? So the more people who are representing, and part of this is also gerrymandering, that they're looking at how many people are within a district and saying, okay, do we need to change these lines, change this district space in order to have enough people living in the district? So do they have to make it bigger? Do they have to make it smaller? Do they have to add, a certain amount of space or a certain location, a city, a town? So that part is called the apportionment. The census is the actual process of counting. Are there any additional questions on that? Okay. As I said, please feel free to type in any questions as they come up. The other chamber within the U.S. Congress is called the U.S. Senate. And the U.S. Senate is a much smaller group. It's 100 members instead of the 435 in the Congress. It's 2 members of the Senate per state. So no matter the size of the state, and if you viewed the webinar last week when we went over the Constitution, or the writing of the Constitution, this was sort of a big point, that every state is equally represented within the U.S. Senate. And the members of the Senate are elected to 6-year terms. So the senators who were elected last year, for instance, in 2016, they're going to be up for re-election again in 2022. So they have a lot more time to serve in the Senate and to vote in bills, or vote on laws, or vote on policies. Much like the Senate, much like the House, each political party has both the majority leader, a leader, and a whip, and they serve the same purposes. The Senate, the majority leader in the Senate is far more powerful than the majority leader in the House, because the majority leader in the Senate really takes on the responsibilities of both the Speaker and the majority leader. So the majority leader is not only working to organize his group, the political party. In this case, the Republicans have the majority in the U.S. Senate, so the Republican majority leader, Mitch McConnell, holds that authority. He's able to decide what bills are coming up in the Senate. He's able to organize. He's able to make deals with his members of the Senate, as well as the majority whip, who much like the House, organizes, make sure that all the Republicans are voting the way that they're supposed to. The Vice President of the United States holds a special power within the U.S. Senate. The Vice President's job, basically the Vice President has 2 jobs according to the U.S. Constitution. The first one is to take over the presidency if the President is not able to. The second job is to preside over the Senate. And in the case of Mike Pence, our current Vice President, he's had to go to and preside over the Senate a couple of times due to now, and this is fairly unusual. The Vice President usually doesn't have to preside over the Senate. Typically, what's called the Senate Pro Tem is the person who's in charge of presiding over the Senate. The Senate Pro Tem is the most senior member of the majority party. So right now, the most senior member of the U.S. Of the Republican side of the U.S. Senate is a gentleman named Orrin Hatch from Utah. He is the most senior member, so he is what's called this Senate pro tem. And if the president, vice president, and speaker of the House are not able to perform the duties of president, the Senate pro tem becomes the fourth person in the line of succession as the person who would take over the presidency if those three were not able to. But the pro tem is typically the person who presides over the Senate. The vice president only goes and presides when there's going to be a tie or when they think it's going to be a tie. And the Senate and the vice president ends up being the tie-breaking vote. This happened when the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, came up for nomination. She was she has to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate, which we'll talk about in a second. And there were 50 Republicans who voted for her, and 48 Democrats and 2 Republicans who voted against her. And because it ended up being that 50-50 tie, Vice President Pence had to come in and basically preside over the Senate, and was there to also vote as a tiebreaker to give the 51 votes for Betsy DeVos to become the new Secretary of Education. He was also there when the health care bill was coming up for the Senate, that the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell had organized, said, okay, we're going to have a vote on this version of a health care bill. Mike Pence and Vice President Pence and Senator McConnell both thought that there would be a 50-50 tie, that 2 Republicans would join the Democrats and Vice President Pence would end up being the tiebreaker again. It ended up that only 49 Republicans voted for the bill. 3 Republicans voted against it, and so Mike Pence was not able to give a vote. It ended up being 51 senators against the bill and 49 senators against the bill. But we'll talk a little bit more about those parts in a second. The other leadership in the U.S. Senate is on the minority party side. So the Democrats, just like they have in the House, have both a minority leader and a minority whip to organize their agenda and organize the votes. Now, in the case of the Senate, they have a couple of extra special powers within the Senate that we'll kind of talk about in a moment. But in terms of Senate function and really what I like to call Senate dysfunction, kind of goes along with the responsibilities and the power of the Senate. And so part of the function and part of the responsibilities of the Senate is called advising and consenting to presidential nominees. And this goes towards a check on the president. In most cases, the president does get his cabinet, his most senior advisors in departments of the executive branch. Typically, the president is able to get those people that he or she wants as this president's advisors. The president also gets to nominate ambassadors to other countries, and the Senate does confirm them, as well as federal judges, including Supreme Court nominees. So in the first 6 months of President Trump's administration, he was able to nominate, and the Senate confirmed, Neil Gorsuch as a new federal judge, as a new Supreme Court justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. The Senate also has to consent to treaties. So when President Obama was making treaties with other countries, when President Trump starts doing that as well, the Senate will be able to confirm whether or not they agree to these treaties. Most treaties by a president are confirmed by the Senate. There are some that are not, and some have to be rejected and then redone by the president if the Senate does not consent to it. But I mentioned dysfunction because unlike the House Representatives, the minority party in the Senate has a lot of rights, has a lot of power. That especially at a small majority like we have today, with out of 100 senators, there are only 52 in the majority and 48 in the minority. So the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, has a lot of power to be able to, as long as he's able to keep the 48 Democrats united against President Trump's agenda or against Mitch McConnell, they're able to make a lot of power. And it comes from the idea that there is unlimited debate and deliberation in the Senate. The Senate is supposed to take its time in creating policies. The House of Representatives, because there's so much power in the majority, they can just kind of make decisions that only affect the majority, that only the majority agrees to. In the Senate, they are forced, because of the rules that were created by the Senate, they're really forced to agree across the party or across the parties, that that a certain number of Democrats and a certain number of Republicans have to agree on policies, on laws or bills for them to become laws. There's also something called the filibuster, which basically is someone not allowing for the debate to end. In a lot of cases today, it's up to the minority party to say, well, no, we want to continue. We don't want to stop a debate on this law or on this bill. We want to continue making speeches. They do this a lot these days. In 1948, a U.S. senator from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond, actually had the longest filibuster in United States Senate history. He basically stood in the Senate giving a speech for over I'm trying to remember the amount of time, but it was a record-breaking time, over a day's worth of time that Strom Thurmond just spoke. And he was reading out of the dictionary, he was reading recipes, he was reading Dr. Seuss books. He just continuously read and tried to stall and not allow for a vote on a civil rights bill to be voted on in the Senate. And the filibuster usually happens when the minority party or just someone in the minority knows that they're going to lose a vote, so they just filibuster. They don't allow the time to stop. This brings us to our next poll questions. Who typically presides over the U.S. Senate? Is the majority leader, the minority leader, the Senate pro tem, or the party whip? Who usually presides over the Senate? Give about 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the just majority of you are correct that it was the Senate pro tem. The majority leader does kind of organize the agenda for the Senate, but it is the Senate pro tem that presides over it. That is the person in charge of counting the votes and moving the Senate along, or moving the business along. There's one more poll question before we move on. And who has to approve members of the president's cabinet? Is it the House, the Senate, or the president himself? Five more seconds. Okay, thank you. So it is the U.S. Senate. So the Senate has the responsibility to consent over the cabinet, the federal officials, ambassadors, federal judges, and treaties. So that is the job of of the U.S. Senate. The House does not confirm or does not approve anyone in the president's administration. So moving on to how laws are made. So, and we'll sort of take it as an example of the healthcare bill that came up and for now is sort of on the back burner, is not really being talked about too much for now. So first, the bill is introduced, and in the case of the healthcare bill, it started in the U.S. in the House of Representatives. Speaker Paul Ryan had created this a bill to basically both repeal the healthcare bill that was passed under President Obama, and then replace it with a different bill. It can be introduced by either House or the Senate in most cases. Remember, in the House of Representatives, they can only the House of Representatives has to start debate on both spending and tax bills, but all other bills can begin in either the House or the Senate. Once a bill is introduced, it goes to the committee. Both houses of Congress have a lot of the same committees. The House does have generally a lot more committees, but the bill goes to the committee that basically would oversee that bill, or would have oversight over the part of the executive branch that will implement the bill. So it goes to that committee, and there are several options of the fate of that bill. One would be that the committee decides, well, we'll look at this bill, we don't really want to discuss it. And at that point, the bill is essentially dead. It's not being discussed by that committee. It can be moved out of the committee by the petition of the majority. So, especially in the case of the House of Representatives, if the majority party wants a bill out of the committee, they can push it along. It can also be just voted for and approved by the committee. So if the committee chairman decides, okay, I want to be able to make this bill, I want to agree to this bill, they have a vote, and it'll go up for the approval. It then goes to the full House or the full Senate. The Rules Committee would have to establish an amount of time that the bill is going to be debated, especially at the House side, and then the Committee of the Whole is the full House or Senate that is going to be voting on that bill. Once the bill is once the standing committee makes those rules, it comes up for debate and up for a vote. Basically, there are the yeas and the nays. The yeas are going to support the bill. The nays don't support the bill. If the bill passes after that debate, there's the majority yeas, then moves to the other congressional chamber. So in the case of the healthcare bill, it started in the House of Representatives. The majority party moved it out of the committee, and they voted on it as all 435 members of the U.S. Congress. They voted for it, and then moved over to the Senate. Usually, the Senate will at least look at the original bill by the House and either tweak it, make changes to it, and then go through the committee process there. In the case of the healthcare bill, the vast majority of Republican senators actually did not like the bill that the House voted on, so they wrote a whole new bill, and Mitch McConnell was the main writer of that bill. And again, they voted out of the committee. It did not have any committee hearings or public hearings. And in this case, in terms of the yay or nay votes, as I mentioned before, it ended up being the majority nays with 51 votes to 49 votes supporting the bill. So if the bill passes both houses of Congress, so let's say the Senate Republicans or the majority voted for that health care bill, it would then go to a conference of both members of the House and the members of the Senate debating between each other and deciding on a final version of the bill that both houses of Congress would then vote for. If both houses of Congress agree to that new conference bill, it then goes to the president. And the president has the option of signing the bill, turning it into law, or what's called a pocket veto. If the president doesn't want to sign it, but also is okay with it becoming law, if he just kind of puts it to the side and allows 10 working days to go past without doing anything with it, it then becomes law. It wouldn't have the presidential signature, but it would still become law. The other option for the president is to veto, meaning that they reject it and it has to go back to the Congress. And the Congress can only make it law if 2/3, about 66% of both houses of Congress approve of that bill. And the reason for that 2/3 majority is to make sure that it is a consensus of a broad amount of the parties that actually agree to the bill. The president may have a whole different opinion, but as long as a majority of the Congress in both political parties agree with it, it becomes law. This is really an example of how our check and balance system is in action, that it's not just up to the majority, it's not just up to a president to make bills or to make laws. It really has to be that consensus. It has to be an agreement between a lot of different people for a bill to become a law. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the process of impeachment. It is a process that is talked about quite a bit in the reading assignments, as I mentioned, and it is sort of something that is brought up on occasion in today's news with issues of what the president has done while in office or before he became president. So I just want to kind of touch a little bit about what happens in that process. It is a long process. It all starts off with the Justice Department investigating and then creating what's called a special prosecutor or special counsel, which is what we have today with Robert Mueller having sort of his own investigation, a private special investigation done only by him and people that he selected to be able to look at the actions of the Russians in last year's presidential election, as well as what happened, what President Trump's campaign did during the course of the campaign as well. If the special prosecutor believes that laws were broken, particularly if the president broke any laws, it would then go to the House Judiciary Committee. And the House Judiciary Committee essentially acts as a grand jury. And they have to look at the evidence and decide if there's a majority of vote of the members of that committee who recommend the president broke the law. It then goes to the full House of Representatives and a vote for impeachment. And the vote for impeachment essentially says that there's enough evidence. They're not necessarily convicting the president of anything, but through that vote of impeachment, they're saying that there's enough evidence to start to have a trial. Now, we've gotten to this point twice. President Bill Clinton got to this point that he was impeached by the House of Representatives for on accusations of perjury, lying under oath in a court, and it also happened with President Andrew Johnson, who was impeached, who got to this point that the Congress believed that he broke a law that the Congress made, that he wasn't able to fire members of his cabinet without congressional approval. Richard Nixon got to the point of the Judiciary Committee looking at the evidence against him. And as soon as that happened, Richard Nixon was told by his legal counsel essentially that he was going to be impeached. So he actually resigned as our only president to resign from office. Nixon decided to resign as opposed to being possibly impeached. So we've gotten to the Judiciary Committee essentially for 3 presidents: Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton. We got to the point of an impeachment vote by the House of Representatives for both President Johnson and Clinton. The trial then goes to the U.S. Senate, and the House Judiciary Committee become the prosecutors. So they are all generally lawyers, so they become the prosecutors. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the judge for the hearing. The defendant, typically in this case it would be the president, has his own lawyer, someone who's defending the president. And the full 100 members of the Senate serves as the jury. And after the trial, when the judiciary members give their evidence, go act as prosecutors, the defense lawyer is able to cross-examine, bring his own witnesses. Then it goes to the Senate for a vote. And in order for a president to be convicted and removed from office, 2/3 of the Senate, which is essentially 67 members of the Senate, have to vote to approve the conviction and removal from office. Now, as I said, we had 2 presidents who had the full vote of the House and were impeached. In the case of President Johnson, he was about 2 votes away in the conviction stage of the Senate, or by the Senate, from being removed from office. He had 2 votes away from that 2/3 majority of being convicted and removed from office. In President Clinton's case, he did not get anywhere near the 2/3 majority. He did not even have a majority of the Senate approve that he had broken the law. So Johnson was far closer to being removed from office than Johnson was the closest to be removed. President Clinton obviously was 1 step away, but he was not removed from office. Are there any questions? I'm not seeing any questions at this point. I will stay online for a few more minutes. I can stay online for about another 5 minutes or so. So if you do have questions, feel free to type them in. But thank you all for attending. Thank you for participating in the polls. As I said, if you have questions, type them in. But thank you so much for attending. You will receive an email tomorrow with this recording, as well as the appointment scheduler that you can certainly go take a look at. But again, thank you all for attending, and have a good day and good luck in your program.